I'm Troy Thompson. Over the last 15 years, our family has worked hard to create a place we call the center of the universe. A place where our kids and someday our grandkids can come home to and laugh, have fun, learn how to work, pray, worship God, and be a place to celebrate life with all our friends. After a quarter century in uniform, I put away one set of boots for another, working on our acreage, improving the land, fixing some structures, and building new ones. We say, give back to the community, be useful, keep your hands calloused, and spread the gospel. This is a little place in a little state right in the middle of flyover country, from which cries out a voice in the wilderness to all who might want to listen, learn, and laugh along with us. This is our American dream. Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to Sunnyside. So glad that you're joining me today, wherever you are, whatever it is that you are doing. I hope you're being useful and making the most of your time and helping others be in the sunny side of somebody else's life. I have got to talk today. I'm going to present a correlation that, I don't know if you've heard this before or not, but I want to give you some background, and I like to pursue ideas that are maybe from a different angle, and so I thought that today would be a great day, Columbus Day, nothing to do with Columbus, whatever, but it just happens to be that's the case when this comes out, and I thought it would be a good time to deal with something that, as former President Barack Obama has to say, I got a problem with that. I've got a problem. And the problem that I am having, and maybe you are too, or maybe you haven't thought about it, or maybe you just don't know, or you believe whatever it is that is, put in front of you in different modes of media. And that is that the vice president, Kamala Harris, is just a regular old middle-class human being who's kind of a victim, who's survived and struggled and got to the top by hard work and effort and intelligence and all of these other things. And I got a problem with that. I really do. In fact, you might have heard the Vice President Harris, say over and over again that she's from the middle class. Oh, yeah. It sounds something, I think, like this.
Well, I'll start with this. I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me. She worked very hard. She was able to finally save up enough money to buy our first house when I was a teenager.
I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother was hardworking. She raised me and my sister Maya. She saved up, and it was only by the time I was a teenager that she could afford to actually buy her first home.
I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager.
I grew up a middle-class kid. I was raised by a hard-working mother who saved up, and by the time I was a teenager, she was able to afford to buy our first home.
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
When Barack Obama was talking to, admittedly, they were campaign workers for the Harris campaign recently, just this past week. He kind of chided the black men that were in the group, and he wanted to talk to the brothers, which is how he phrased it. And then it's always interesting how Barack Obama or Kamala, I guess I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say there, but at the end of the day, they change their dialect when they're talking to certain groups. Hillary Clinton did it. Folks do it. Mitt Romney put on, flannel when he came to Iowa to look more Midwestern, I guess. Politicians do that, and it's irritating. They want you to believe that they're just like you. And this is what President Obama sounded like when he was talking to that group of black men who were working in the Harris campaign just last week.
I also want to say that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly and say that when you have a choice that is this clear, when on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles and pain and joy that comes from those experiences. Who's had to work harder and do more and overcome and achieves the second highest office in the land.
President Obama also made it sound like, hey, she's just like you. She went to college with you. She went to she worked her way up. She comes from a background like you. I just don't believe that. I don't think it's true. And so I'm going to tie some things together. I think that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree at all. And so I'm going to do something today that I think is interesting so that you can understand exactly who the vice president actually is, in my opinion. And I think that she's the Brahmin Marxist next door, if you want to believe it that way. So let's begin. Let's have a conversation about 4 things today. And I'm going to tie it all together for you. First of all, I'm going to tell you what a Brahmin is, because that's what Vice President Harris is. She's her roots on her mom's side are from India. And people, I don't know if people are aware that India still has a caste system. And at the very top of that system are the Brahmins. And her father came from Jamaica. And so he has his family heritage is interesting in and of itself, in that his family founded Brownstown, or helped to found Brownstown, and built their wealth on the slave trade. Black people selling black people into the slave trade. And then when that fell apart, then they went into, real estate and trade and other things like that, but they were able to do so because it's rooted in slavery. Vice President Harris, who at one point anyway, she changes her opinions and positions all the time, supported reparations. And she owes more than anybody in my family ever could because of, her dad's side of the family. And then we're going to talk about the Marxist nature of her parents and how she grew up in that regard. The meaning of tenure and what that is all, what that means. It's not very middle class at all. And then I'm going to tie it all up with a correlation between chattel slavery, Marxism, and that Indian caste system. So settle in, whatever you're doing. I hope you have time to listen to what I call the Brahmin Marxist next door. In the grand theater of history, few narratives are as intricate and convoluted as that of India's caste system, a socio-economic structure that has shaped the lives of millions for millennia, woven into the fabric of society like a thread in an elaborate tapestry. To understand this complex system, one must first delve into its origins, an exploration that reveals not just a social hierarchy, but also the profound ways in which it has influenced personal destinies, cultural expressions, and the collective psyche of a nation. The origins of the caste system are steeped in antiquity, tracing back to the Vedic texts around 1500 BC. I know some people say BCE, but whatever. It is in these ancient scriptures that we find the earliest references to social stratification, the division into 4 primary categories: Brahmins, who were the priests and scholars. I don't know how to say Indian words. I'm going to try. Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas? Let's just do that. Warriors, they were the warriors and the rulers. So above the warriors and the rulers were the Brahmins. Then the Vaishyas, who were the traders and the agriculturalists or the business folks. In that system, the business folks were less than the rulers. And the Shudras, who were the final of the 4 castes, they were the laborers and the service providers. The middle and lower classes. That was not merely an economic delineation, but a spiritual mandate in Indian culture that was believed to be ordained by the gods, plural. This hierarchical structure, however, was not static. Over centuries, it evolved, fragmented, and splintered into hundreds of subcastes or jatis, each with its own rules and customs reflecting local traditions and geographical diversity. This evolution speaks to the adaptability of the caste system, supposedly. It was both a reflection of societal needs and a mechanism for maintaining order amidst a rapidly changing world. The caste system became deeply ingrained in Indian society, influencing marriage, occupation, and social interactions. The notion of ritual purity played a critical role in establishing boundaries. Those deemed impure or polluting were often relegated to the margins of society. The Dalits, historically known as the untouchables, were subjected to severe discrimination, forced to live outside the village confines, performing tasks deemed unacceptable by the higher castes. This stratification was not merely a backdrop, it was a living reality, imbuing everyday life with an air of inevitability. Families bound by tradition would go to great lengths to maintain caste purity, often leading to arranged marriages within caste lines, a practice, by the way, that remains prevalent today. It is a poignant reminder of how tradition can bind individuals to the past, shaping their identities in ways that are both profound and painful. As India entered the modern era, the caste system began to clash with emerging ideas of equality and individual rights. The British colonial period brought with it new educational and employment opportunities, creating tensions that would lead to a re-examination of caste dynamics. That's right. When Westerners came in under the guise of the British flag, it seems like it disrupted some of these old-time ideas about where people belong in these castes. Reformers like Jyotirao Phule, and I'm probably saying these names right, forgive me, and B.R. Ambedkar emerged as voices of change, advocating for the rights of the marginalized and challenging the very foundations of the caste system. Ambedkar, a Dalit himself, became a pivotal figure in the fight against caste discrimination. He sought to dismantle the hierarchical structure, arguing that true freedom could only be achieved through the annihilation of caste. His vision culminated in the Indian Constitution, which enshrined equality and outlawed untouchability, making a significant turning point in the struggle for social justice. It's talked about quite a bit. Despite legal frameworks aimed at abolishing caste-based discrimination, the system's vestiges persist in various forms. In rural areas, caste still dictates social interactions, political allegiances, and economic opportunities. The irony lies in the simultaneous progress and regression. While urbanization and education have fostered a growing middle class in India, caste identity continues to play a role in shaping political discourse and social mobility. The phenomenon of caste politics illustrates this ongoing struggle. Political parties often mobilize support along caste lines, exploiting these identities for electoral gain. This has led to a paradox where the very system intended to be dismantled now finds a new life in the democratic process of India, complicating the narrative of progress. Consider the story of Meera, a young woman from a lower caste who dreams of becoming a doctor. Her journey is fraught with obstacles, from familial expectations to societal prejudices. As she navigates the complexities of a caste-conscious world, her narrative becomes a microcosm of the larger struggle for equality. Meera's tale is not unique. It echoes the experiences of countless individuals striving to break free from the shackles of caste. Their stories reveal resilience, hope, and the unyielding human spirit. A testament to the idea that while caste may define one's circumstances, it does not determine one's destiny. As India stands at the crossroads now of tradition and modernity, the question remains, can the caste system be dismantled entirely? The answer, I think, lies in collective will. The resolve to confront the past with embracing a future free from discrimination. This endeavor requires a multifaceted approach: education, advocacy, and a commitment to social justice that transcends caste boundaries. One must acknowledge that the journey toward equality is not merely a political or legal battle, it is a deeply personal one. It is about understanding, empathy, and the recognition of shared humanity. As India continues to grapple with its caste legacy, it is these values that will ultimately guide that nation toward a more equitable society. Lots of great words and I guess the popular words of today in the Democratic Party. The history of the caste system in India is a testament to the complexities of human society. It's a narrative woven with threads of tradition, struggle, and hope. As we reflect on this intricate tapestry we've talked about, we're reminded that the pursuit of justice is a continuous journey, one that requires us to confront uncomfortable truths while aspiring for a future where dignity and equality are the birthrights of every individual, regardless of caste. In this unfolding story, the characters, each within their own dreams, struggles, and triumphs in India, remain at the heart of the narrative that we're talking about, reminding us that while systems may be oppressive, the spirit of humanity is resilient and ever hopeful.
Sit still. I said, I can't. Something's tickling me. She thought I was crazy. She said, well, open your coat. I unbuttoned my coat and opened it up. There was a mouse.
Stories. Everybody has them. The stories of our parents, grandparents, and our friends remind us who they are.
That's kind of what I think it is, too, is memories. Growing up, my dad was an English teacher.
How they got here and what they've learned on the way. What if you could collect as many of your loved ones' stories in a high-quality audio format to keep forever? What if you could share the sound of your loved one's voice, their laughter, and their thoughtful manner with your children, or when you are simply driving to work?
He spent literally 3 months in North Dakota freezing buckets of ice water to make this awesome ice fort that we never spent time in, but it was amazing for the moment it was done.
Well, you can with a Sunny Side of Life biography. Produced here at Sunnyside Farm Studios. I'll sit down with your loved one for 1, 2, or several sessions to record their stories.
I think my students are going to have good memories of me.
You'll receive the full raw recording, an edited selection arranged in audio chapters for easy reference, and produced segments you can use for family gatherings, special moments, or any time you just want to hear your loved one's voice.
And those are probably my most cherished things.
Share it with your family and make it a keepsake, because that's what stories are, keepsakes of the time we had together.
Never forget that. I was petrified of mice after that forever.
Email your query for more information to Troy at sunnysidefarmstudios.com. The email is also in this show's notes. Let me record your loved one's story so you can share the sunny side of their life in their own words for years to come.
I actually do kind of remember that now.
I think that there is a caste system, or at least the Democratic Party sure seems to want to make or outline a caste-like system in the United States of America. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris's mom, Kamala Gopalan, who was Harris, married her dad, whose name was Donald J. Harris. We'll talk about him in just a little bit here. She was very proud of her Brahmin roots in India. She came to the United States to study biology and biomedical science and that type of thing, and she succeeded in that regard. And then she was supposed to go back to India by her own account, by Vice President Harris's own story. However, she stayed. She got married to Donald J. Harris. Interesting. Vice President Harris's dad's first part of his name, anyway, is Donald J. So anyway, I think we should talk a little bit about that proud Brahmin who met a proud Jamaican to the United States, Donald J. Harris, and the history that is behind his background. If there's one thing history should teach us, it's that certainly no story is simple, especially when it's told by the ones who lost the most. In the case of Jamaica, where I've been, beautiful country, with its turbulent history of colonization, slavery, and complex social hierarchies, simplicity is really just a luxury. The history of black-on-black slave trading in Jamaica is a story often untold or overlooked. And it isn't just a tale of chains and markets or the haunting whispers of the auctioneer's gavel striking the block. No, it's It's a story of survival, of self-preservation, and of a brutal system where even the victims became complicit. And it's also the story of Brownstown, a place not so much founded as it was born out of necessity, out of the twisted need to create a life from the remnants of a broken world. Long before Jamaica became synonymous with reggae, rum, and rebellion, and not to mention incredibly fast runners, it was a place of fertile lands and endless exploitation. In the early 16th century, following the arrival of, Christopher Columbus on Columbus Day, the island became an outpost of Spanish and then British colonization. The indigenous Arawak and Taino people who had lived there for centuries were decimated through disease, violence, and forced labor. As their numbers dwindled, colonists, always in search of new labor, looked to Africa. But Africa was not a passive victim in this exchange. African kingdoms, driven by the demand for European goods, engaged in wars, capturing prisoners who would then be sold as slaves. The brutality was not the exclusive domain of Europeans. No, African kings and merchants made their own bargains. They traded their captives, men, women, and children, to the Europeans in exchange for guns, textiles, and other luxuries. Thus, black-on-black slave trading was born, an irony not lost on those who lived through its brutal consequences. When the first ships carrying enslaved Africans arrived on Jamaica's shores in the 17th century, that's the 1600s if you're not following along, they brought with them a cargo of broken languages, splintered cultures, and fractured identities. These people, who had once been warriors, farmers, traders, and parents, were now just bodies, flesh, and muscle. They were Africans sold by Africans, caught in a system of black-on-black enslavement that predated their arrival in the New World, but found its most vicious form in the plantations of Jamaica. Slavery in Jamaica was not just a footnote, it was actually the foundation. I know that that's what they say about America, but in Jamaica, it's true. The island's economy ran on the profits of sugarcane and other cash crops, and the blood that fueled those fields was African. The British plantation owners, ruthless in their pursuit of wealth, worked enslaved Africans to death, knowing there were always more ships, more bodies, more souls to replace them. But the story doesn't end there. Enslaved Africans in Jamaica didn't simply suffer in silence. There were resistances, individual and collective. Maroons, runaway slaves who had escaped into the mountains, formed communities of their own, refusing to accept the brutality of plantation life. There were uprisings like Tacky's War in 1760, where enslaved Africans banded together, attempting to reclaim their stolen freedom and their dignity. Yet, there was another side to this story, the darker, often unspoken truth of complicity. Over time, as plantations grew, some black Jamaicans, often those who had gained freedom through maroon resistance or the scarce opportunities for manumission, became intermediaries. They were sometimes used as overseers, men who wielded the whip over their own kin, tasked with keeping the others in line. It was survival, but it was also betrayal, and it is also the family line of Donald J. Harris. The 19th century brought change, though not nearly as fast as the enslaved might have hoped. The British Empire, after years of resistance, economic shifts, and the moral pressure from abolitionists, finally outlawed the slave trade in 1807, well before the United States did. But slavery itself persisted until 1834, when the Emancipation Act was passed, leading to the gradual and grudging liberation of Jamaica's enslaved population. After emancipation, Jamaica's society had to rebuild itself, and this was where the complexities of black-on-black slave trading and colonial legacies played out most profoundly. Freed men and women sought new lives, new opportunities, and new places to call home. This is where the story of Brownstown begins. It was founded by a guy named Hamilton Brown, a plantation owner and one of Jamaica's notorious figures. Brownstown was not simply a benevolent act of creating a community for freed blacks. No, Hamilton Brown was a staunch defender of slavery. In fact, his name appeared on petitions and documents that opposed emancipation, fearing the economic collapse it would bring to Jamaica's plantation system. And yet, like so many men of his era, he was pragmatic. When slavery ended, he saw an opportunity. The town, which is nestled in the lush hills of St. Anne Parish, was established as a market town, a hub where freed blacks could trade, farm, and make lives for themselves. The irony, of course, was that Brownstown bore the name of a man who had once profited off the very system that had oppressed its first residents. Hamilton Brown's role in founding the town was not one of altruism, but of economic foresight. If he could not own men's bodies anymore, he could still profit from their labor as tenants and small farmers. The people who settled in Brownstown came from all over the island of Jamaica. Some were descendants of the Maroons who had fought so fiercely against the British. Others were newly freed people seeking just a fresh start. They brought with them stories of resilience, but also the trauma of a past where Africans had sometimes betrayed Africans. The legacy of black-on-black slave trading wasn't just a distant memory, it was a reality that many of the town's first residents had to reconcile. Families had once been divided by the system. Some sold, some staying behind. They found one another in Brownstown. They built churches, schools, and market stalls. They tilled the land and sold their produce, slowly creating a community that was distinctly their own, even as they carried the burden of their history. The town's evolution mirrored Jamaica's own struggles, pockets of progress, punctuated by the shadows of the past. In the modern era, in the modern era, Brownstown remains a symbol of survival and adaptation. Its history, however, is layered, complex, and often uncomfortable to recount. The town's namesake, Hamilton Brown, is remembered both as a man who opposed the liberation of black people and yet inadvertently created a space where they could carve out their own destiny post-emancipation. The residents of Brownstown took the name of their oppressor and made it their own, a kind of reclamation that speaks to the resilience of Jamaica's people. The legacy of black-on-black slave trading in Jamaica is one of those uncomfortable truths that history seems to like to sweep under the rug. It's easier to talk about the cruelty of white plantation owners, which certainly was true, than to confront the fact that some Africans participated in this trade, that some black overseers worked alongside their white masters. But in understanding these truths, we gain a fuller picture of the forces that shaped communities like Brownstown, a place where survival meant confronting hard truths and forging new paths, even when those paths led through the shadows of betrayal. Brownstown stands as a testament to the resilience of a people who, even when faced with impossible odds and the weight of their own history, did manage to turn a page. And while that page might be marked with the scars of the past, it is also filled with stories of new beginnings, of forging lives out of the ruins, and of creating something enduring from the remnants of bondage. The story of Brownstown, I think, is the story of Jamaica itself, complex, resilient, and always moving forward, even when its steps echo the past. Hello, friends and neighbors. This is Troy Thompson of the Sunny Side of Life. Let's spend this year together reading the Word of God. Just take 10 to 15 minutes a day to join with me in the Sunny Side of Life's Bible in a Year experience. It may be just what you need. Lord knows I do. Besides, it's free, it's fast, and it's good for your soul. And you can start anytime. It doesn't take much to get caught up and on pace with us each day. So, whether you've read the Bible entirely already or you're just looking for a way to get it done, take a few moments with me here and let the good book be the sunny side of your life each and every day. Now, Donald J. Harris, obviously, was born way after any of the slave trading and was far removed from the actual oppressive acts of being a founding member, like his ancestors were, of Brownstown. So I'm not saying that. However, he wasn't poor, and he wasn't middle class. He was part of the upper echelon of Brownstown, which, if you've been to Jamaica, I mean, there's quite a division between upper class, whatever they think middle class is, and the lower class that permeates the nation. And then he moved to California. And that's, of course, where he met Kamala. And they got married. And they had some kids. And then they became PhDs. I don't know if that was the order, but they became PhDs, philosophy doctors. Kamala's mom, was a scientist, a PhD in biomedical sciences and did a lot of work with oncology, actually. Apparently pretty brilliant. And then spent a lot of time, eventually, after they divorced, went to McGill University up in Montreal, Canada, which is in Quebec, if you care. They speak French there. And that's where Kamala spent most of her youth. She came back to the United States as a teenager. And that's when, of course, we hear about how her mom was able to afford a house. Well, yeah, she went to Berkeley, California, just like you and I, just like us, just regular folks in the suburbs around Berkeley, California, coming from Montreal and all of those experiences, just like you and me. Both her father and her mother achieved tenure. But what's tenure? Well, it's not a very middle-class proposition, in my opinion. In case you don't know, academic tenure, well, it's a concept that has been both celebrated and criticized, revered, and, I must say, reviled. In theory, it offers security and freedom and stability to those who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of knowledge. In practice, well, that's where things get a little messy. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that messiness is where the most interesting stories seem to hide. Imagine the university system like this. As a grand old house, brick, ivy-covered, its walls thick with history and whispers of long-departed professors who once roamed its hallways. Tenure, then, is the key to one of its finest rooms. A cozy study with a fireplace lined with bookshelves and a mahogany desk that's seen decades of debates and discoveries. But the key isn't given easily. It's a prize earned through years of late nights grading papers, that's your job, publishing in obscure journals, okay, navigating departmental politics, which is a reality, unfortunately, of academia, and presenting at conferences that take you to the less glamorous parts of town. Ooh, Crimea River. And once you've got that key, well, you might find that the cozy study is both a haven and a trap. See, academic tenure has been around for over a century in American universities. It originated as a way to protect professors' intellectual freedom, ensuring that they could teach and research without fear of retribution from university administrators or government officials. The American Association of University Professors, the AAUP, was founded in 1915, Bolshevik, laid down the groundwork arguing that scholars needed the freedom to pursue truth, even if their discoveries were unpopular or controversial. The idea was noble. I think an institution dedicated to knowledge should be a sanctuary, a place where truth could flourish without fear of censorship. But like any idea with good intentions, tenure was also a deal. A promise that those who survived the crucible of the academic ladder would be granted a lifetime of security. And as we know, any lifetime promise comes with its share of fine print. Tenure, when it works as intended, allows academics to take intellectual risks of all sorts. Think of the discoveries we might never have had if professors were forced to censor themselves. Oh, but they are. Those brave souls who challenged established norms wrote incendiary critiques and pursued radical theories. The freedom to explore the fringes of human understanding truly is a gift. It's also a necessity if we ever truly want to progress. Tenure, in its best light, is the foundation for that gift. But tenure also means loyalty. It's a lifetime of allegiance to the university, a sort of Faustian bargain, if you will, where the promise of freedom is balanced against the institution's grip on your career. You've earned the key, my friend, but you've also signed up for life. The first and most obvious advantage of tenure is job security, and in a world where employment is maybe increasingly precarious, the promise of a permanent position is a rare gem. For professors, it means they can focus on whatever their work is. We don't really know, without the fear then of being dismissed for expressing controversial opinions or for publishing research that goes against popular opinion. Does that even happen anymore? This is, after all, the bedrock of academic freedom. Consider the iconoclastic figures of academia, those who dared to challenge the status quo. Without tenure, their careers might have been short-lived. Tenure allows for the cultivation of these intellectual outliers, the ones who push the boundaries and ask the uncomfortable questions that lead to progress. You know, like Galileo, Marx, or even Darwin. If they were alive today, well, they might not have gotten very far without such protections. Well, Galileo, Marx, and Darwin, they were all before 1915. But moreover, tenure allows professors to take the time necessary for deep and meaningful research. In today's fast-paced, publish or perish academic culture, I don't know how fast-paced that is, there is immense pressure to produce results quickly, sometimes at the cost of quality. Amen. Tenure provides the breathing room needed to engage in long-term projects, to write the magnum opus, so to speak, that might take a decade or more to complete. That's what they're doing. They're working on a magnum opus. It's a rare luxury. I mean, for anybody outside of academia, it's almost ridiculous. Who has that? The chance to immerse oneself completely in the life of the mind without worrying about where the next paycheck will come from. That sounds very middle class. And then there's the prestige of tenure. Well, let's not pretend that tenure doesn't come with its own aura. For many academics, achieving tenure is akin to, well, like knighthood, a recognition that you have arrived, that you belong to the elite few who have fought the good fight and emerged victorious, or did what they were told. It's not just about job security, friends. It's about respect, status, and recognition of one's contributions to the intellectual community, whatever that is. Of course, with every room of one's own comes the risk of stagnation. Once a professor secures tenure, there is a significant shift. The urgency, the drive that propelled them to publish, to teach, and innovate soon fades into complacency. The cozy study, which once seemed like a sanctuary, can become, I guess, a prison of comfort. The critics of tenure argue that it encourages mediocrity and laziness, and they might be right. When job security is guaranteed, the incentive to excel can diminish. Sounds kind of Marxy. Some tenured professors, critics say, retreat into their offices, avoiding students, teaching the same courses year after year with the same yellowing notes. The promise of academic freedom in these cases just morphs into an excuse for academic apathy. Then there's this notorious ivory tower effect. Tenured professors are often accused of becoming disconnected from the real world. Shocking. Locked in their offices, surrounded by books, they may lose touch with the changing dynamics of society, industry, and even the student body itself. Well, when you're the smartest person in the classroom by your own degree title, of course. When professors are insulated from the consequences of their teaching or research, no matter how outdated or irrelevant it becomes, their work risks becoming esoteric and disconnected from practical realities, a common problem with today's colleges and universities. And let's not forget the power dynamics. Tenure, while providing freedom, also entrenches a hierarchy. Like a caste. Junior faculty, adjuncts, and graduate students often just find themselves at the mercy of tenured professors who wield enormous and undue influence over their futures. The tenure system creates a divide: those who have secured their positions and those who remain precariously perched on the fringes of academia, struggling to break into the inner sanctum. And then, in the current academic landscape, the majority of university classes are actually taught by adjuncts, part-time, non-tenured faculty who often work for low pay and with little job security. While tenured professors enjoy the perks of their positions, adjuncts often cobble together work from multiple institutions, sometimes teaching as many as 8 courses in a semester just to make ends meet. They are, in many ways, the underpaid labor force that props up that ivory tower. The rise of adjunct labor is a direct consequence of the tenure system itself. As universities cut costs, they increasingly rely on cheaper adjuncts. They are cheaper, and they're more expendable than those tenured faculty. It's an open secret in academia, a shadow economy of underpaid workers that makes the lavish benefits of tenure possible. And this is where the moral dilemma creeps in, friends. Tenure, once a noble concept meant to protect academic freedom, is now part of a system that perpetuates inequality within the university. It's a 2-tiered system: the secure and the insecure, the permanent and the temporary. And while tenured professors may preach about social justice and equality, their very status often depends on the exploitation of their non-tenured colleagues. So, where does this leave us? Is tenure a relic of a bygone era, a system in need of reform like so many other systems, or an essential safeguard for academic freedom? Proponents argue that tenure must be preserved, even expanded, to protect the integrity, whatever that is, of the academic institution. Without it, they say, the university becomes vulnerable to corporate and political interests that could stifle research and education. Imagine a world where a professor could be fired for teaching evolution, climate change, or critical race theory, or more conservative policies, ideas, and economies. Topics that challenge prevailing beliefs. Without tenure, academic institutions could become nothing more than the factories producing government-approved, business-friendly, climate-friendly, woke-friendly knowledge. But the critics, they call for reform, or even abolition. They argue that tenure should be replaced with long-term contracts that provide security, but also hold professors accountable for their performance. Others suggest that tenure could be restructured to include periodic evaluations to ensure that professors remain engaged and productive throughout their careers, like every other worker in America. The truth, as it so often is, probably lies somewhere in between. The debate over tenure is not just about job security or academic freedom. It's about what kind of university system we actually want to have and what kind we want to build. It's about balancing the need for intellectual independence with the responsibility of staying relevant and connected. It's about protecting professors while also ensuring they serve their students and society, and probably ought to have those protections on a variety of sides of whatever aisle you happen to be looking at. In the end, tenure is a gamble. For some, it's the dream job, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Perhaps like Vice President Harris's mother or father. For others, it's a gilded cage, a privilege that comes with its own limitations and compromises. The key to understanding tenure, though, is to recognize that it's not just a perk or a prison. It's kind of a paradox. It's the freedom to explore, the security to speak out, and sometimes the excuse to retreat into comfort. But there's just not that many conservatives, for example, that are succeeding in gaining that tenure. Whether it remains the cornerstone of academia or it becomes its downfall will depend on how universities navigate the fine line between independence and accountability, freedom and responsibility, and probably determining who gets it, which they already do. But it's pretty one-sided. In the grand ivy-covered halls of the university, tenure is both the prize and the burden. It's a symbol of everything that's right and wrong with the pursuit of knowledge. And like any story worth telling, it's full of contradictions, complexities, and the ever-present question: what happens next with tenure?
Hi, this is Scott Bertelson. I was a public education instructor at Forest City High School for 39/40 Hooks counting years. And during that time, I learned a lot about myself and life, as I still am now in my retirement. That's why I am hosting Mr. B's Dinner Party on this podcast platform, and I hope that you will join me at the dinner table for conversational morsels for the mind. Now, you may be wondering what that is. Well, you'll have to tune in to find out. But let me guarantee you, you will leave my dinner table feeling full and feeling satisfied.
Join Mr. B's Dinner Party from Sunnyside Farm Studios every other Wednesday, premiering August 23rd, 2023.
Hope that you will join me for Mr. B's Dinner Party on this platform.
Well, Donald J. Harris was a tenured professor. He was a Marxist economist, like famously so. So how do you come from a allegedly middle-class, single parent? Well, it's not alleged. They did divorce. And she and her sister were with the mom, who was a biomedical scientist and professor at Berkeley when they came back to America after living in Montreal. Just like you and I, man. If there's one thing that we can try to do to wrap this whole thing up is I say that there's just not that big of a difference between a background on one side of the family that is rooted in its wealth from a foreign country like Jamaica in the slave trade and the benefits that could be gotten from the folks who were then freed and putting them to work in Brownstown, and the benefits of a family from the Brahmin class in another foreign country of India. and the expectations and the mindset of tenured university professors who believe themselves to be the smartest people you have ever met. And maybe they are intelligent in some ways. I don't doubt that. I'm certainly not a biomedical scientist, nor am I an economist. I'm certainly not Marxist. But how do you tie all of that together and create some children who then find a way, in Vice President Harris's case, to get all the way to be running for president and trying to make us all believe, hey, she's just one of us, just like you and me. And what does she really bring to the table? She doesn't seem to want to tell us. Because I think what she really is the Brahmin Marxist Next Door. Very proud and certain of her role in the universe on her Brahmin side, and very certain that the people who should be in charge, those are the type of people that need to run our government and our economy. They're the smartest people. They know better than you. They certainly don't need faith or religion in any real capacity. And that's the Marxist side from Donald J. Harris. If there's one thing history has proven, friends, it's that people have an uncanny ability to categorize, control, and condemn one another. This is what the parties do in general, and I would argue that the Democrat Party does better than anyone, whether it's by skin color, birthright, or economic class. It's as if we can't help but sort ourselves into boxes, or that we are attempting to be sorted into boxes. That's called pigeonholing. As if our sense of order depends on knowing exactly who belongs where, who deserves more, and who deserves less. You know, how to get that mysterious fair share out of whoever is determined to be rich. Well, this compulsion has led to some of the darkest corners of human history, corners where chattel slavery, Marxism, and the Indian caste system all intersect. Imagine these three concepts as guests at an impossibly uncomfortable dinner party. Chattel slavery is the bruised and broken figure sitting at the end of the table, its shackles rusted but still clanking with every movement. Then there's Marxism, a firebrand with a grizzled beard and ink-stained hands. Sits across from it. No calluses on those hands, by the way. They're ink-stained. You know, lots of thinking and writing involved. Yeah, Marxism sits across from chattel slavery, eyeing the chains with a mix of rage and pity. And then there's the Indian caste system, ancient, enigmatic, its face obscured by centuries of tradition, its posture rigid with the certainty of an immutable hierarchy. At first glance, these three individuals sitting at this table seem to have very little in common beyond their shared history of oppression. But look a little closer, and you'll see that they are actually very connected by a logic that craves division, by systems that thrive on separating the powerful from the powerless. They may appear different, but beneath the surface, they are bound by the same thread: control. It's no surprise that chattel slavery is where the story begins. It's the most brutal form of the three, reducing human beings to property, stripping away their autonomy, and binding them in chains of ownership. The term chattel itself derived from the same root as cattle. Well, it reveals the cruelty of the system. Human beings are just turned into livestock, their value measured in work output, not in their humanity. Chattel slavery's heyday, particularly in the Americas, was fueled by the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans who were torn from their homes, transported in horrific conditions, and then forced into a lifetime of labor on plantations wherever they were. Their status as chattel just meant that they were not merely enslaved, but they were commodities. They were sold, traded, and inherited as if they were furniture or farmland. But this system was more than just a mechanism for economic gain. It was a form of social control. Slavery was built on the idea that certain groups of people were inherently inferior, that their lives and bodies were not their own. And this idea required a framework, a justification that not only validated the system, but also perpetuated it across generations. Religion, pseudoscience, and law were all employed to sustain the belief that slavery was was not just necessary, but natural. In Marxist terms, slavery was the ultimate expression of the capitalist drive for profit. Karl Marx viewed slavery as a brutal manifestation of the exploitation that was inherent in capitalism, a system where human beings are commodified for the gain of just a few. In Marx's brilliant analysis, the plantation owner was a capitalist, and the enslaved were the proletariat, stripped of their rights, their humanity, and their capacity to labor for their own benefit. But the connections between chattel slavery and Marxism are not as straightforward as that may seem. For Marx, the driving force behind social change was class struggle. But slavery was not only about class, it was also about race. And it's here that the dinner party becomes particularly tense. Remember the dinner party? Marxism, with its emphasis on economic relations, struggles to fully address the racial aspect of slavery. It views the enslaved African as a worker, but it cannot quite reconcile with the fact that the system was built not just on labor exploitation, but also on racial subjugation. The Democrats may have found a way around that, or maybe not. The Marxist critique of chattel slavery highlights the ways in which capitalism perpetuates inequality, but it focuses its focus remains primarily on class. According to Marx, the fundamental problem with society is the division between those who own the means of production, the bourgeoisie, and those who sell their labor, the proletariat. Marx predicted that the contradictions within capitalism would eventually just lead to revolution, as the oppressed workers would rise up and overthrow the ruling class. But here's the catch. While Marx's theory of class struggle provides a framework for understanding economic exploitation, it falls way short when confronted with the complexities of racial and social hierarchies. Chattel slavery, for instance, was not simply a capitalist endeavor, it was a racial one, deeply intertwined with the belief that Africans were inferior and thus destined for subjugation. Marx's theory is further challenged when we turn our attention to the Indian caste system, which operates on a completely different set of principles. The caste system isn't about ownership or capitalism. It's about birthright and hierarchy, entrenched in a millennia-old tradition that predates the rise of capitalism itself. The Indian caste system, unlike chattel slavery, does not reduce people to property. It is more insidious in its subtleties, a social structure that assigns every individual a place from birth, one they cannot escape regardless of their talents, ambitions, or labor. It's a hierarchy divided into four main groups. The Brahmins, let's just do the easier words. The priests, which are the Brahmins, the warriors, the merchants, and the laborers. With the Dalits, or the Dalits, I don't know. They're also known as the untouchables, outside the system completely, relegated to the lowest and the most despised status. While the caste system is not based on economic ownership in the way that slavery is, it operates under the same logic of control and exploitation. Those born into lower castes are expected to serve those above them, performing the most menial and degrading jobs without question or complaint. The caste system dictates not only a person's occupation, but their entire social identity, limiting whom they can marry, associate with, and befriend. In some ways, the caste system is a mirror image of chattel slavery. Where the latter denies people their humanity through ownership, the former denies people through their agency through birthright. But both are built on the same foundation, a rigid social structure that creates an unbridgeable divide between the privileged and the oppressed. Here, the dinner party guests might shift uncomfortably a little bit in their chairs. See, the Marxist looks at the caste system and sees a hierarchy that aligns with his theory of class, but he struggles to reconcile the fact that caste is not about ownership or labor relations. It is a system upheld by religion. She can't stand religion. Culture, she wants to create completely anew, and tradition, which doesn't mean anything. The caste system longevity is its resistance to economic or political revolution, and that exposes a blind spot in Marxist theory, which is not all hierarchies are rooted in economics. The real connection between chattel slavery, Marxism, and the Indian caste system lies in their shared purpose, the perpetuation of human control. Each system, in its own way, enforces a division of humanity into categories. Some deemed superior, others inferior. They create an us, quote unquote, and a them, quote unquote, drawing lines that separate the privileged from the oppressed. The victim class. Chattel slavery enforced control through physical ownership and legal subjugation. The Indian caste system uses social, religious, and cultural codes to enforce compliance, ensuring that individuals remain fixed within their birth-assigned roles. Marxism, while championing the liberation of the oppressed, reveals its own limitations when it encounters systems that are not strictly about class. What's fascinating, though, is the way these systems interact with one another across time and geography. The British colonists, for example, found the Indian caste system pretty convenient. They used it to their advantage, codifying it into colonial law and reinforcing caste divisions. Why? To maintain control. Similarly, the legacy of chattel slavery in the Americas was shaped by economic interests, but also perpetuated through racial ideologies that outlasted the formal end of slavery itself. These intersections demonstrate how these systems of oppression are not isolated. They feed into one another, reinforcing hierarchies that keep power concentrated in the hands of just a few. Marx envisioned a world where the proletariat would rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie, dismantling the structures of oppression once and for all. But, as the history of chattel slavery, Marxism, and the Indian caste system shows, breaking free of those chains is far more complicated. The systems may evolve, shift forms, or even disappear, but the underlying logic remains. Control of the people is most easily maintained when people are divided and kept in their place. In the post-emancipation era, for instance, freed African Americans in the United States found themselves trapped in a cycle of economic exploitation through sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, and systemic discrimination. New chains that did replace the old ones. Similarly, despite India's independence and constitutional efforts to dismantle caste discrimination, the caste system persists, shaping social interactions and opportunities in subtle but pervasive ways. The uneasy dinner party we've been talking about will come to a close with an uncomfortable realization. While the guests may argue over the details of their respective systems, they are united by a common goal: control through economic means, racial hierarchy, and social stratification. That ensures that power remains concentrated, that privilege is protected, and that revolution, if it comes at all, will be slow and costly and only to the benefit of the people who are in control or wish to remain so. The Marxists might rail against the injustices of capitalism and call for solidarity among the oppressed, although Marxism has never succeeded. The representative of the caste system might cite tradition and order as the foundation of stability. And there might be some truth to that, but big problems, and the ghost of chattel slavery might linger. A reminder that systems of oppression, once entrenched, they're not easily undone. Chattel slavery, Marxism, and the Indian caste system are linked not by their specific mechanisms, but again by their shared logic for control of human beings. Each system reveals the human tendency to create divisions, to define superiority and inferiority, and to enforce those divisions through laws, traditions, or economic structures. It's a dark truth that these systems reflect the most enduring aspects of human society: the need for order, the fear of the other, and the desire to maintain power. And while the forms of control may change, the underlying structure remains the same. Slavery, class, and caste are not just historical anomalies. They are part of the ongoing human story, a story of oppression and resistance, of chains that bind and the struggle to break free. And if there's one thing we can learn from this tangled history, my friends, it's that while the guests at that dinner party we've been talking about may not agree, they are more alike than they'd ever care to admit. And I've said on this show many times that there's not a huge difference, in my opinion, between the ultimate goal of attaining power and control over the American people, whether it's from the Democrats or from the Republicans. But the idea that we are somehow just the same as the Vice President of the United States, and that she is just like us, and that she's just a regular old Joe like you and me. Well, that's not the case. She's a Brahmin Marxist who might be right next door. I take umbrage with that. I'm not like you. I'm not a Marxist. She claims to be a capitalist. That ain't true. Maybe crony capitalist. She claims that she wants to make things easier because she understands the middle class. And I don't think that she does. And I think that's because, at the end of the day, who she is won't let her actually be the person she says she wants to be.
I believe that the people of America want a leader who's not trying to divide us and demean. I believe that the American people recognize that the true measure of the strength of a leader is not based on who you beat down, it's based on who you lift up.
Anyway, that's how I see it. What are your thoughts? Until then, my friends, have a great week, and I hope you take the time to truly be the sunny side of someone else's life. I want to thank all our friends and guests for stopping by for this episode of The Sunny Side of Life. All the Sunny Side of Life players who stopped by, creative support provided every day by my incredible wife Heidi and our fantastic 4 boys. Thanks to every one of our listeners. That means you. A big shout out to my brothers and sisters in uniform holding the line around the world. Share the word, folks. Let the people know what we're up to. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, and follow us on social media. All skits are written or adapted and directed by me, Troy Thompson, and are produced here at Sunnyside Farm Studios and delivered to all platforms by Buzzsprout. Music and sound effects are provided by Soundstripe. The Sunny Side of Life is a weekly production about our life on the family farmstead here in Iowa, the liberties we prize, and the pursuits which make us happy. Now, none of this is possible without Christ in our lives. For the Lord God is our sun and our shield. He gives us grace and glory. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the sunny side of your life, liberty and pursuits, be in Christ, and made evident unto you each and every day, and give you peace.